Hey guys, it's Greg with Apple Explained, and today we're going to explore the history of Apple controversies. This topic was the first place winner of last week's voting poll, and if you didn't get to vote, make sure you're subscribed. That way the voting polls will show up right in your mobile activity feed, and you can let me know which video you'd like to see next. Now there's sort of an unwritten rule in business that says you can't build a multi-million-dollar company without a few scandals and controversies. For example, WorldCom got busted for accounting fraud to inflate their assets by tens of billions in the early 2000s, Volkswagen was exposed for lying about the carbon emissions of their so-called clean diesel model of the Golf TDI in 2010, and Martha Stewart got found out for insider trading in 2002 and was subsequently chased out of Westport, Connecticut for it. So for Apple to have over $1 trillion in the bank, they certainly have experienced their fair share of controversies. And almost all of Apple's scandals can be placed into three categories: copyright theft, product issues, and shady labor practices. Although near the end of this video, I'll cover miscellaneous cases that don't really fit into those three categories. And I should also mention that this video won't be covering anything before the late 1990s because that would make this video an hour long. So let's start with copyright theft, since I'm sure a few of you are pretty confused as to what exactly that means. This mostly entails Apple releasing new artwork or software without crediting or licensing it from the original owner. You might remember not too many years ago a popular desktop application named Flux. It essentially removed the blue light from your computer's display during nighttime in order to reduce eye strain and prevent disruption of your sleep. Now, Flux announced they were releasing code for sideloading a version of their app onto iOS devices, and that means users could install the app without having to go through the App Store. Apple quickly revoked the ability to sideload Flux, citing a violation of the Developer Program Agreement, and no more than 2 months later, Apple released the first beta of iOS 9.3 with a bunch of new features, one of which was Nightshift, a display option that detects when the sun sets and slowly warms up the white balance of the display to match the sunset, which was exactly what Flux did. And this caused a lot of backlash from the tech community, since some claimed Apple was just stealing a feature from a small startup without giving them any credit for the idea. But Flux responded to this incident in a much different way. They actually commended Apple on adding Nightshift to iOS, saying that Apple's involvement in fixing this problem was a big commitment and an important step. Although they did ask Apple to let them release their Flux app in the App Store, but Apple declined. Now, more recently, Apple has come under fire the past 2 summers for the same reason: icon similarities. If you remember back to last WWDC a few months ago when Apple previewed the Siri Shortcuts app, a blockchain site builder startup named Shift sued Apple for $200,000 for stealing their logo. And while the icons bear a slight resemblance, the lawsuit seemed to be more of a publicity stunt than anything else. And a similar situation came up again last year when the App Store got a new icon with iOS 11. This time, a Chinese clothing brand called Con sued Apple for stealing their logo. Now, it's true that the icons looked really similar, with the exception of rounded versus squared lines, and the Beijing People's Court accepted the case back in December of last year, but we haven't heard anything since. Now, the next type of scandal isn't exactly theft, but it did rob customers of I/O. Apple has always been known for pushing the tech industry forward, but being forward-thinking comes at a cost, and more often than not, that cost are legacy ports and input methods. The earliest version of this scandal dates all the way back to 1998. Apple had just shown off its first major product since Steve Jobs had returned, and it was none other than the Bondi Blue egg-shaped iMac. Consumers and Apple fanatics alike were insanely hyped up for this machine to release, but spec heads and tech analysts were skeptical of its success. You see, the iMac was the first mass-market computer to not include a floppy disk reader, the storage method of the 90s, which made the iMac the first legacy-free computer in the world. It did, however, include a standard tray-loading CD-ROM reader, and later a slot-loading CD-DVD combo superdrive. It was also the first Mac to include USB ports, which was about as popular back then as the Thunderbolt 2 port is today. Now, Apple bet correctly on the popularity of USB and CD-ROMs, since the lack of a floppy drive barely hurt sales, and the iMac went on to be the #1 best-selling computer in the fourth quarter of 1998, beating out the HP 6355 and the compact Presario 5170, both of which were very popular machines. Now, exactly a decade after the iMac launched and CD-ROMs became an industry standard, Steve Jobs came out on stage at Macworld 2008 and introduced the thinnest notebook ever, the Macbook Air. It was everything a notebook should be, and featured a full-sized keyboard, a fast CPU, and an all-day battery in a 3-pound package. But it was missing something almost every computer back then had: a super drive. And as you might have expected, many people in the tech industry and in the media were quick to share their opinion on how the lack of a superdrive made the MacBook Air unusable and an irresponsible purchase. But most customers felt differently, since the MacBook Air sold extremely well and set a new industry standard of notebooks being diskless. And cases similar to this one continue to happen to this day, like Apple killing the standard USB port on the MacBook and MacBook Pro, and removing the headphone jack on the iPhone 7. The point here is that these scandals don't last very long, generally aren't super harmful to the company's image, and pushes the industry forward. But unfortunately, the same can't be said about the next type of scandal: labor practices. So Apple contracts several different mega factories in China to manufacture pretty much every product, with the exception of the Mac Pro, which is manufactured in Texas. The biggest factory Apple uses, Foxconn, is well known for its questionable labor practices and management. They can fire and hire tens of thousands of employees in a matter of hours. And this ability is extremely important, since production needs to ramp up or down at a rapid pace after the release of a new product. Employees live in dorms provided by Foxconn, and it's located in a small industrial area nicknamed Foxconn City, which is a win for employees since it's so cheap, and a win for factories because they can wake up their employees in the middle of the night in the event of a production schedule change. Additionally, the standards of employment and quality of life are much lower in mainland China than they are in other countries, so employees are almost disposable to factories and can be paid on pennies an hour, and even less if the worker is 13 or 14 years old, which happens more often than you might think. Before 2010, there were a couple incidents regarding workers and their mental health. In July 2009, a 25-year-old worker lost an iPhone prototype and was subsequently beaten and had his home searched by Foxconn managers. Afterwards, he jumped off his 12-story apartment building and fell to his death. As 2010 rolled around and Apple's dependency on Foxconn increased, more and more workers were jumping off buildings to commit suicide. At first a 19-year-old female, afterward a 28-year-old male, then a 23, 21, and 17-year-old, all within the span of 3 months. That year, 18 Foxconn employees attempted suicide, with 14 of them succeeding. Apple responded in May 2010 after 7 deaths and 11 attempts, with a statement to Huffington Post saying, "We're saddened and upset about the recent suicides at Foxconn. A team from Apple is independently evaluating the steps they're taking to address these tragic events, and we will continue our ongoing inspections of the facilities where our products are made." Now, one measure Foxconn took to prevent more suicides was installing nets outside building windows to prevent or catch jumpers. And while this does seem pretty morbid, the nets actually appeared to work. The following year, suicide rates at Foxconn decreased by almost 4 times, and by 2012, there was just 1 suicide per year. Now, 1 is still too many since these are human lives we're talking about, but it was greatly improved compared to years prior. Now I'm going to cover all the other miscellaneous scandals that didn't really fit into the other 3 categories. The first being planned obsolescence. For years, there has always been speculation revolving around planned obsolescence and Apple. In other words, rumors about Apple sabotaging old devices to boost sales for new devices. And these rumors aren't just baseless speculation like some other Apple rumors or controversies, because we actually have some evidence to prove it. People have run benchmark speed tests on iOS devices at various times, and there were huge dips in performance after updating the firmware. Google Trends shows spikes in the number of searches for iPhone slow in September year after year, typically when new iPhones and iOS updates are released. And it all seemed to culminate in December 2017 when Reddit user TechFire published an article on the r/Apple subreddit with the title, "PSA, iPhone slow, try replacing your battery." They explained that they noticed their iPhone 6s had been getting noticeably slower at a rapid pace, and even noticed that their brother's iPhone 6 Plus, released a full year before his phone even hit the market, was faster. They decided to run a Geekbench test and got a single core score of 1,466 and a multi-core score of 2,512. But after replacing the battery, the device's scores went up to 2,526 single core and 4,456 multi-core. Now, soon after this article, Apple confirmed that they do throttle devices with degraded batteries by putting out a statement that read, "Our goal is to deliver the best experience for customers, which includes overall performance in prolonging the life of their devices. Lithium-ion batteries become less capable of supplying peak current demands when in cold conditions, have a low battery charge, or as they age over time, which can result in the device unexpectedly shutting down to protect its electronic components." Now, this was arguably a smart engineering decision since most users would rather have their device be reliable than fast. Also, lithium-ion battery degradation isn't just a problem for Apple's devices, but any device using the technology. So although Apple had good reason for throttling older phones, the public did not take too kindly to this new development, thus beginning Batterygate. News outlets published headlines like, "Apple iOS 11 will slow down your phone," and "Apple hit with lawsuits after admitting it intentionally slowed down iPhones." And angry tweets were bubbling up from every corner of the internet. One user wrote, "If Apple is going to slow down an old phone so the battery can handle it, you should receive several alerts about it. They're coercing people to buy something new, even if they want to pretend that isn't their intention." Apple quickly responded with another public statement in the form of a blog post titled, "A Message to Our Customers About iPhone Batteries and Performance," in which they announced a 12-month promotion where you could have your iPhone's degraded battery replaced for $29, down from $79. And you should take advantage of this offer while you can, since it ends in December 2018. So just like almost every other company, Apple has had their fair share of slip-ups and controversies, but I don't think any of them have been detrimental to the brand. And I'm sure we can expect Apple to make several more debatable decisions in the years to come. So that is the history of Apple controversies, and if you want to vote for the next video topic, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.